Hello, everybody. My name's Abby, and for those of you that don't know me, I am a registered nutritionist with the Association for Nutrition, and I'm also a senior nutritionist here at ABL Health. So this is where some of you may recognise me from, and it's great to see everybody here joining us tonight and saying hello in the chat. I am really, really excited to be here actually tonight, talking about something which is a really, really nice thing to talk about. And I suppose the reason why you're all here, this is important to you as well. So thank you all for taking a little bit of time out on your Thursday evening to come and join us. I think Grace has gone over all the correct, housekeeping bits and bobs. I suppose the only extra thing to say is feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat, continue to say hello. And for any questions specific, so any specific questions, you can pop them in the Q&A box and they will go through to Grace for us to go through at the end of today's session. So I'd quite like to just provide you with a bit of an overview first of the types of things that I'm going to be talking about today, so you know what to expect. So first up, I'm going to be talking all about the festive environment. So the environment around us, what we see, what we hear, what we smell, and how that influences our food choices. I'm also going to be talking about our mindset. And you might be surprised to learn that the way in which we think can have a massive impact on our food choices and our decisions. And I'll be sharing ways in which we can shift our mindset into something which is much more positive for our long-term journey. No webinar would be complete if we didn't share our, practical advice, real life examples of ways in which we can continue to keep up with our healthy changes over the festive season and beyond. And just a note on that as well, this webinar is for everyone. So even if you don't celebrate Christmas, the information that I'm going to be sharing can be applied to any celebration throughout the year. Any time of year that you find it difficult to stick to a healthy, balanced diet, we can apply some of the tools that I'm going to give you today. And of course, no webinar would be complete without a Q&A, which I've already mentioned. So please post any questions that you've got as we go along. You don't need to wait until the very end to post them. If you've got something in your mind, pop it in the Q&A and we'll collect them all and try and answer those as best as we can at the end. So here we are. Christmas is very, very much upon us, the festive season. And December for many of us is a time when, all the festivities sort of come into play, and it's all around us. There's no getting away from it. But I don't know about anybody else, if you've noticed this, it seems to creep in on us even earlier and earlier each year. Now, I've not long got back from a summer holiday, believe it or not, to America. I came back in October, and you wait all year for your summer holiday. It's finally upon you. You have a great time. It's lovely and hot. And it was so apparent that when we returned to the UK, the UK had just braced itself for Christmas and everything that surrounds it. And it was a bit of a shock to the system, to go from one extreme to another. But I wonder if anyone else has noticed that things just tend to creep in a little bit earlier each year. And there are quite a few things that we can attribute towards that. So first up, we've got our twinkly lights and our lit up town centres and homes. And this is probably for me where the magic of Christmas lies. And if you're lucky enough to be in New York at this time of year, this is the famous tree which sits outside the Rockefeller Center. And I believe it doesn't actually get switched on until the end of November. So definitely will be in full swing by now. But though we have many town centres, homes, supermarkets, shopping centres, which are well lit up before this date. Now, it's not just me that feels the magic of Christmas this way. There is a little bit of science behind this. So the bright twinkly lights can trigger the release of dopamine, which is the feel-good chemical in the brain. So it makes us feel good. It makes us make those associations with the festive time of year. So there's a lot more going on inside our brains than might originally meet the eye. What else do we associate with this time of year? Well, if anyone has been to Tesco or Aldi recently, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about here. Our supermarkets, absolutely laden with buy one, get one frees, volume promotions, and other sneaky tactics, other promotional ways in order to get us to buy and spend more money. there's no wonder that we find it difficult. And I wonder if you've noticed as well that the seasonal aisles are always within eyesight. You never have to walk too far from the front door to find your seasonal aisles. So these are strategically positioned in a way which makes it difficult for us to resist. You might have also noticed as well, when you go into the supermarket, maybe just to nip in for a few things, you notice that things like bread, eggs, those kind of staple items, milk, that you just nip in to go and get, they tend to be towards the back of the store, so you have to walk past all the aisles, all the promotional aisles to get just those bits that you plan to nip in and grab. Chances are the longer you spend in store, you're more likely to spend more time browsing, spending more. Something interesting I learned recently as well is that next time you're in the supermarket, pay attention to any music that's being played, if any. So what supermarkets will often do is they'll play slow music to encourage us to slow down our pace. Thereby, we're spending longer in store, spending longer browsing those shelves, and we're more likely to spend more money. So interesting. See if you can pick that up next time. Another thing that you will notice about this time of year is the never-ending party invites, Christmas do's, work lunches, away days, family catch-ups, friendship catch-ups. And I don't know about you, but it's always a time of year that I always feel compelled to catch up with family and friends that I've not seen for a while, even though I can see them any time of the year. But for some reason at Christmas time, there feels like this sense of urgency to see them. And as you'll all know, there's only so many weekends and only so much time that we can do that throughout the festive month. Now, don't get me wrong, it's absolutely lovely to be invited to these things and to have family and friends that want to share the season with us. But what do these celebrations tend to focus on? Well, a lot of the time they'll be based around food. Let's meet up in this restaurant. Let's bring food and drinks together. And whilst that's okay, it just requires that little bit of extra planning and preparation and boundary setting, which is something that I'm going to be coming on to shortly. The last thing that I wanted to talk about here is the power of advertising. Now, at this time of year, your big food manufacturers, your large-scale companies will spend lots and lots of money on their advertising in a bid for us to try and spend more. So you've probably already been exposed to the adverts, the Christmas adverts, Marks and Spencer's, M&S, McDonald's is what I'm trying to say there. These are ones that always spring to mind for me. And what these advertisements will often do is they will really tap into those warm, fuzzy feelings that make us feel good, make us associate that with this time of year and make us want to go out and buy their products. Now, Coca-Cola is another big one for that. Messages that tug on our heartstrings. Yet think about what that product actually is. Now, interestingly, Coca-Cola recently sponsored the COP27, which is the 2022 United Nations Climate Change Conference, which is great. However, they have been named the top plastic polluter for the 5th year in a row, which to me is just absolutely mind-boggling, blows my mind. Industry tactics. So I can't credit to the source here, but I really like the way this image demonstrates the range of strategies and approaches that commercial companies will go to in order to sell a product and promote health. And if we take a couple of those on there, so reinventing their image, creating an illusion of support, manipulating the media, we can certainly tick Coca-Cola off on quite a lot of those. So let's just take a step back for a moment and think about everything I've spoken about on this slide. Not only have we got our town centres well lit up, decorations going up left, right and centre, but we've also got our supermarkets that are enticing us in. Everybody's planning events and we're seeing it plastered all over social media and our TV screens. Can we see now how our environment is playing this huge part in our decision making? And I've got another slide actually just to show you with that. So I can't credit this image, but I came across this in a recent conference that I attended. And this is a river's metaphor to describe the environmental impact on children's health specifically. Now, the reason why I wanted to bring it up tonight is because we can absolutely apply it to adults, and we can absolutely apply it to the environment we find ourselves in at this time of year. So in summary, I'll talk you through it. What you can see is that the river represents the food environment and what we're up against at this time of year. So we've got the floodgates, first of all, being wide open, or what we can liken to advertising, supermarkets, social media. And what that means is that we've got this huge flow of unhealthy food products coming through, which is our main and staple food supply. And depending on what side of the river we live on, depends on what access we have and to what foods. There's no filter system here, so it's really difficult to not be immediately affected by what's in front of us. What you can also see in the top right-hand corner is you've got an imbalance of rivers. You've got this slow trickle of healthy foods just not reaching the masses that it needs to reach, not reaching people that live on other sides of the river. What we can also see by this is the fact that we have to work upstream to manage the flow, which is really difficult. You know, it's that feeling of working backwards, 1 step forwards, 2 steps back. You know, that's really, really challenging. And that constant tug of war with ourselves. I really want this, but I shouldn't have it. But it's everywhere. It's what I'm seeing. Everyone else is having it. Okay. So if you feel like you're having this constant tug of war with yourself when it comes to food, empower yourself with the knowledge of this food environment and take away that feeling of personal blame. There's a reason why these foods are difficult to resist, and I hope that you're starting to change the narrative for yourselves. Now, there's also another reason why we tend to give in to less nutritious options, and it's all to do with our mindset. It's something that we all do, totally normal, but it can have such a profound impact on our food choices. Now, when was the last time you labelled yourself as bad or naughty for having something to eat? Let's just think about that. When was the last time you used a derogatory word to describe yourself after having something to eat? Okay, another one. Has anyone ever written off a week because of one day that week you ate something or maybe a few things off plan, and so you wrote off the whole week and you said, I'll try again next week? Okay, I'm sensing a few nods in the room. Okay, so this is what we refer to as black and white thinking. It's that tendency to think in extremes, and we attribute eating all healthy and nutritious foods as being good and successful and winning. And we see ourselves eating those less nutritious foods as failing, as being bad, as being naughty. It's when we think that there's no in between. And this type of thinking can stem from years and years of yo-yo dieting. It can stem from the messages that we had as children growing up. You know, the way we heard our parents speak about food, the way we hear our siblings, our aunties, people in our immediate environment. It's how we've heard other people speak about food. Okay. And the problem with this way of thinking is that we're really quick to judge ourselves for anything less than perfect. We're really quick to throw in the towel after eating something off plan, which can lead to this self-sabotage and this abandonment of all weight loss efforts. I wanted to share this analogy with you because I thought it was really quite relevant. If you had a bunch of flowers and one single flower died, would you throw them all away, or would you salvage what you had left? Does this resonate with anyone? So how do we fix this? What can we do to manage this thinking in extremes when it comes to our health and lifestyle? And there's one really, really easy change that you can make almost immediately, straight away, as soon as this webinar finishes, and that is to change the language that you use around food. Acknowledge, recognize those times that you catch yourself labeling foods as good or bad, and see if you can recognize other people doing that as well. And then what I want you to do from then on is swap them to more neutral labels. Now, I personally like to use the words nutritious and less nutritious when describing foods, but you could pick anything, be creative with it, as long as it's staying away from those good and bad ideals. So the second thing we can do is we can start to find a nice place to sit somewhere in the middle. Instead of that thinking in black and white extremes, we need to find some colour. We need to find our middle ground, what you might like to refer to as your shades of grey, or what we can also refer to as rainbow thinking. So what does rainbow thinking look like in practice? Well, that means that just because we've been invited out for our tea doesn't mean we have to completely stop our exercise plans that week. Just because we ate a couple of mince pies at work and a packet of pork scratchings doesn't mean that we have to completely change what we were planning to have for tea, okay? It's not a this or a that. It's not an either or, it's an and. I can go to the Christmas work party and enjoy several glasses of wine, and I can continue to enjoy balanced and nutritious make food choices. Okay, does this make sense? Does this resonate? Does this feel doable? Do we think that rainbow thinking is something that we can manage? So what else can we do to overcome this? What else can we do to ensure that we have a healthy and happy celebration? I'd quite like to go through now some of my own top tips for making that happen. And the first one is to set SMART goals. Now, if anyone is engaged on our ABL programs, you'll have come across this before. So I bang on about it all the time. But the way I like to describe a SMART goal is that it's a clear instruction to yourself, and it's a personal commitment of exactly what you're going to do week to week, day to day, month to month, to get you to where you want to be. So we all have this overarching goal, this reason why we're doing this. You know, what is the purpose? Whether that is to reduce our blood glucose levels, to reduce our risk of diabetes, whether it is to actually run a marathon, whether it is to lose X amount of weight. These are our big overarching goals. And these are at the top of our ladder. If we imagine a visual ladder, these are at the top. Our goals, the things we set week by week, day by day, are the steps to get to that point. We can't just jump from A to B. We have to put steps in place and gradually build up. And this is what your goals are. So this festive season and beyond, you know, whatever celebrations you're having, make sure you're setting yourself some SMART goals. Now, the second thing that I'm going to talk about when it comes to goals, and I sound like a broken record here, but I bang on about it all the time, is it's so important to write those goals down. Once you've thought about it up here, make sure that you are writing it down somewhere visible, a diary, on your fridge, on your phone, somewhere that you can see first thing when you wake up. Now, the reason why this can help is that you are taking that information, that message, you're having to verbalize it, vocalize it, you're having to figure out how to spell it, you're writing it down, you're then looking at it through your eyes. That's 3 steps that goal has had to go through before it is instilled and cemented in your mind, meaning that you're much more likely to do it. Okay, and this is the point, isn't it? We want to make sure that our goals are doable. Okay, so that's the first tip I wanted to share with you. Set some goals over the festive season and write them down somewhere. My next tip is around meal planning. Now, this again is another big part of our program, and I speak about it a lot. If you're new to meal planning, I think the key is to start small. So you could start with maybe planning 1 day a week and gradually build up. So you've got a nice 3 to 5, 7-day meal planner. Now more than ever, it's really important to plan because we've got so much going on. We've got busy, chaotic lives. You know, we've got invites left, right, and centre. So this is why it's so important to have a plan. And, you know, the reason why it can help as well is it takes away all of that difficult decision making in the moment, you know, to allow you the headspace to concentrate on other things. So, for example, maybe you hadn't planned your Friday night dinner and something crops up on the TV, you see an advert for a takeaway. Or maybe you're chatting to somebody, your neighbour, and they talk about going for a chippy tea that night. Now, if you hadn't planned your dinner for that night, you're going to be likely to be much more influenced by these external factors. Whereas if you know that you've got your lovely herb crust salmon, new potatoes and lemony veg, you're much less likely to be tempted. So that's really, really important to stick to that plan. The other way in which meal planning can help. Oh, gone too far now. Where are we? There we go. Giving you a little bit of a screen show of what we're going to talk about next. But the last thing I wanted to say on meal planning really is you can use meal planning to plan in the things that you want to have in your diet. So you can use meal planning to plan in those less nutritious foods. So you're taking away that feeling of restriction, I can't have this, by incorporating it into your plan alongside all the other balanced and nutritious food choices. Okay. So the third tip is all about curbing your cravings. Now, this is more to do with how we deal with temptation, which is a big thing at this time of year. So buffets can be a really challenging time to stick to a healthy, balanced diet. We often find when we're in a buffet environment, whether that is at a friend or family member's house, or whether it's in the work environment where people are bringing in all the snacks for work, we can be more likely to overindulge and eat more than we normally would. And there's a reason for this. So it's a psychological phenomenon which is known as sensory specific satiety. And that's when our taste buds, usually when we're eating the same type of food, our taste buds will eventually tire of that flavour. We then feel full and we stop eating. Whereas when we're presented with a new flavour, which is very apparent in a buffet scenario, our taste buds get excited. There's a new flavour to entice us. There's a new reward that is being, released from these new flavours. So this is why we often find it really difficult to stick within our boundaries when it comes to a buffet environment. So I have a solution for that. And the first solution is to bring your own. If it's a work environment where people are just bringing in the snacks, and they're all there in the canteen or in the kitchen, and let's face it, people are bringing them in from home because they don't want them lying around at home. They think they're doing themselves a favor by bringing it into work, which is great, but it just means that, we've got to be extra cautious then. So bring your own lunch and agree to have that first. And then if you want to, you can still go on and have a couple of things from that buffet environment, a couple of sweet treats, whatever it might be. Okay. If you've got the option as well, if it's a friend or a family member's house, bring your own plate. And, you could make something like a really nice dressed salad, or you could do like a tapas board of hummus and veg sticks, maybe some roasted peppers, some tomatoes, something a bit healthier. And quite a lot of the time you'll find with your buffet environment, it's full of beige foods, full of those processed foods. So actually, people are thankful that somebody has brought in something fresh, brought in something which just breaks up all of that same food. Okay. So the second thing, the other important thing, to do is make sure that you're including foods that you enjoy in your diet in a balanced and sustainable way. This means letting go of that feeling of restriction and allow yourselves the food freedom to make healthy choices and not feel guilty when you do have a donut, a mince pie, a glass of wine. Stick to a shopping list. This is going to be so helpful when you're trying to navigate the supermarket environment. And the one that goes hand in hand with that is to avoid going to the shops when you are hungry. You know that it's going to be much harder to avoid those tempting aisles when your brain is trying to tell you that you need to eat food. So definitely avoid going anywhere hungry. And the final thing to say on this is remind yourself that this isn't your one single and only time that you have to enjoy these foods. Remind yourself that these foods are available all year round. It's just Christmas time where they tend to have fancy packaging all over them to make us buy them. We often have that feeling of missing out. If I don't buy this now, I'm going to miss out on it. But what are you actually missing out on? If you really fancied that moment of indulgence, could you not go out and buy that specific food? I always think about this when I think about the the tins, the celebration tins and the roses tins that are usually, I think they're even there before Halloween. And, we end up buying them because we think, 50p off, I'm going to stock up. But we've got to think about ourselves there and think, well, if I've got those stocked up in the house, am I going to be more tempted because I've got those chocolates in the house? Remind yourself that these foods are available all year round. Chocolate is available all year round. And, take away that feeling of missing out. My fourth tip for the evening is around setting appropriate boundaries. Now, boundary setting is all about educating others on how we want to be treated in order for our own needs to be met. Okay. And some people like to think of boundaries as like a limit or an edge, which defines you as separate from others. And we have to respect our own boundaries. Otherwise, how can we expect other people to? So throughout your celebrations, set your own boundaries to ensure that your own needs are being met. So what does this look like? Well, maybe you've got, a particular set of friends or family members who are always bringing up weight or are always bringing up diet whenever you're there, and maybe that makes you feel uncomfortable. And if so, you can change that conversation into something which is much more positive. And you might like to say something along the lines of, I'm happy that works for you, but that doesn't work for me. I'm trying this new program with ABL Health to develop a better relationship with food, and I would really value your support. Okay. Something else. So maybe you feel like you find it hard to say no to people for fear of offending them or upsetting their feelings. And this is actually what we refer to as people pleasing. And it's something that I've certainly been guilty of in the past and something that I still continue to work on throughout my adult life. But let's just say that sounds like you. And, maybe I'll use the work environment as another example. You're at work and, somebody brings in a plate of chocolates. I keep using that example, brings in a box of chocolates and says, I've brought these, I know they're your favorites, and starts handing them around. And maybe prior to that moment, you hadn't even thought about chocolate, but just at that moment when that person is bringing them in, you feel obliged to say yes. Okay. So what you can do here is you can empower yourself and you can set your own boundaries. And you might like to say something along the lines of, no thanks, I don't fancy chocolate right now. I'm trying this technique called mindful eating, which allows me to thoroughly enjoy these foods when I truly feel like them. Now, I'm sure many of you can relate to this last one. Can't quite see the chat, but I can see that you're chatting. This last one then. So we might all have this family member who is always trying to pan us off with leftovers before we usher us out the house with leftovers. And sometimes those leftovers are really welcomed and we really want those leftovers, but other times we might not want them. And if we think about it, that person that is pushing us out the door with those leftovers, they're trying to assert their own boundaries because they don't want those foods lying around at home. So we have to do the same. Okay. So this last one, you might like to say something along the lines of, I've really been getting into my meal planning and prepping a lot of my meals. My freezer is full. Perhaps you could keep this in your own freezer for a rainy day. Now, those are just examples of setting boundaries. But, boundary setting isn't easy. If you're not used to setting boundaries, it will feel uncomfortable. It will feel awkward. But the first time you do it, the first time you start to just set some boundaries, it's a really powerful thing, and it does get easier the more you practice it. My fifth tip for the evening is still around boundaries, but it's more around alcohol. Now, it's absolutely okay if you enjoy a little bit of alcohol, but throughout the celebrations, for many people, this can be quite challenging in terms of quantity and just being in that environment where maybe there's more temptations. So I have 3 top tips for managing your alcohol intake in general that you might like to look at. Number 1 is to have a smaller drink than what you usually have. If you normally drink wine, then go for 125 mils. That's a small standard measure of wine. If you're at home, I would strongly advise you invest in a measure so that you know what that small glass looks like. If you drink beer, could you go for bottled beer or half pints? Okay, that's smaller glass. My second tip is to alternate with water. If you are drinking quite a bit, have a pint of beer, pint of water, glass of wine, glass of soda. All right, you're alternating it either with a soft drink or a water. Something else that you might like to do, and something I've done before, is I like to fill up a big gin glass with loads and loads of ice. I'll squeeze in a couple of limes. I'll put a few sprigs of mint leaves, and then I'll top it up with soda water. And if I'm feeling a bit fancy, I will throw in some frozen blueberries in there. And that for me is like a nice posh drink that I feel like, I'm not just having a boring glass of water. I'm having something which is a bit more exciting. And don't be afraid to ask for that in a pub or in a restaurant as well. You can ask for your soft drink, your soda water, to be served in a wine glass. So it feels like something a bit more exciting. And my third tip around alcohol is to offer to be the designated driver. So take away that decision making around whether or not you want to drink and stick to your lime sodas. And this might not be every single celebration, but if you've got quite a few, see where you can offer to decide on no alcohol that evening. You're going to wake up feeling fresher, feeling brighter, and feeling better in general. Now, when we think about setting boundaries around alcohol, that also means deciding how many drinks you're going to have and sticking with that and respecting those boundaries. So if you're likely to be in an environment where you're going to be tempted to continue drinking, or maybe there's other influences for drinking more alcohol, how can you plan for that? Is it that you could plan you could pre-book a taxi home so you've got to be home for a certain time? Or maybe you can plan an event for the next day in the morning, booking a gym class or booking a catch up with your friend so that you've got something in the diary. That way you're much more likely to not want to stay out and drink and want to go home, have a good night's sleep and wake up feeling a bit better the next day. It might also be about planning on what you're going to say to somebody if they're the type of person who always encourages you to drink more. It's absolutely okay to decline respectfully without offending anybody or upsetting their feelings. And, to do that means you are living in line with your values and you're respecting those boundaries that you set. And if you really don't want to drink at all, you could say something along the lines of, I'm taking a break from alcohol, actually. It doesn't agree with me anymore. Simple as that. Set those boundaries and move on. So my last tip for the evening is around keeping active. Now, I have saved the best till last with this one because it is something that I massively struggle with at this time of year. When it's cold and dark, I have to really, really dig deep inside to, bring myself to do some exercise. It's really, really challenging. So, if anyone can relate to that, I feel you. But keeping active looks very different to each and every one of us, and that's absolutely okay. For some of us, it might mean walking the dog. For others, it might mean going to a community class. It might mean playing with the grandkids. It might mean doing a sport. It might be doing some household exercises, some movement around the house. Whatever that activity is, I would encourage you to practice and prioritize something every single day, even if it's just 5-10 minutes. Try and keep yourself active in whatever shape or form every single day throughout your festive celebrations. You're going to feel much better for it. And if you've got a lot of commitments going on around December, maybe you've got a lot of family gatherings, could you involve them in your plans? If you've arranged to meet up with a friend in a restaurant, could you maybe suggest something different, like going bowling? Or, I don't know, you could suggest going for a walk and a coffee at the end of the walk. So you're doing something a little bit different, can you swap any of your plans to something which involves a little bit of activity? Have a think. The next thing I wanted to talk about is for anybody that works from home. So this is certainly something I struggled with when I used to work out and about in the community and then went to work from home. And something that I actually missed a bit was the commutes to work. So in the morning, you put your music on, listen to the radio, you think about your day ahead, you almost process and get yourself in that work mode when you're driving. You get to work, maybe you've got a little bit of walk into the office, maybe saying hello to a few people en route. Whereas a stark comparison when you're working from home, you might get up, have a shower, but then you're just sitting back on your desk, in front of your laptop, ready for your morning. Before you know it, your morning is gone and you've hardly moved at all. If this sounds familiar to anyone, something that I've started doing, albeit it's taken a bit of a backseat over the past couple of days with it being so icy, is do a fake commute to work. So that means popping on your woolly hat, your scarf, your gloves, your coat, your shoes, and just having a little bit of a walk around your block where you live. You can even take your headphones, listen to a bit of music, put the radio on, and mimic that little bit of a commute that you would normally have when you go into work. We don't get much daylight hours in the winter here in the UK, so it's even more important to try and get yourself out in the morning when there is sunlight, to make us feel good, because there's a lot of connections with light and our mood. So if we can just get out for 5-10 minutes, expose ourselves for sunlight, you're going to feel much better about your day ahead of you. You're going to feel much more likely to feel productive and have a good day ahead of you. Now, going back to what I said a second ago about motivation, I'm sure many of us can relate to this. It is so hard to motivate ourselves at the best of times, no matter, the winter months. So I've got something that I think you're going to like, and that is called the 5-minute rule. So this is something you might like to try. Basically, you tell yourself you're just going to do something for 5 minutes, okay? And once that 5 minutes are up, you either forget to reassess or you're completely happy to keep going. Now, a lot of people think that that's such a short amount of time, how can it be effective? Well, it is so important because it's laying down those important pathways in the brain that are required to form a starting habit. And most people think that the longer the task, the more motivation is required, but that's actually false. So the 5-minute rule works because most of the motivation is just required to start. Once we get going, once the momentum builds, there takes very little additional energy from our brains for us to keep going. So all of that motivation is just in that start, and then the momentum builds up. So if this is something you're struggling with in terms of motivation, give that 5-minute rule a go. See how you find it. And if you want to stop after those 5 minutes, that's totally fine as well. So we are actually coming towards the end of today's webinar, and therefore I would love to invite you all to take part in a little bit of a reflection exercise. So I want you to think about and write down something that you've taken away from today that resonates with you and that you're going to implement throughout the rest of the festive season. What does that look like for you? Okay, so just as a bit of a recap, the things I've covered tonight. So I've talked about the festive environment and the impact this can have on us, shifting away that feeling of personal blame and feeling like we're the problem. I've also spoken about the impact that our mindset can have, and we've looked at a simple tool that we can use, i.e. changing the language around food to, help us have that healthier relationship with food. And I've also finished off with some of my own top tips for keeping on track, keeping yourself accountable, and having a healthy festive month. So have a think. What did you learn? And I'm going to leave you with that for a few seconds. And I'm also going to take this time to hand back over to Grace for our Q&A session.
Thanks for that, Abby. That was a really interesting webinar. I think you've covered lots there. It seems to be nearly everything that we need to think about in that sort of half an hour that you spoke for. So that's fab. Thank you. There's not a lot of questions in the Q&A, but I noticed in the chat box it was going quite crazy when you speak about meal planning, and lots of people were saying they struggle with meal planning. So I just thought, do you have any top tips on maybe how to start meal planning, or like the little steps that people could be taking? Because maybe sort of doing it all in one go could be quite daunting. So anything there?
Definitely. I think it is such a big daunting thing, and meal planning, is different for each and every one of us. So meal planning can be so simple as taking out your bowl before you go to bed and weighing out your porridge oats, so that in the morning when you wake up, you've got your oats there, that's your breakfast, you're going to make your porridge, whatever it might be. So that is just like one really tiny example of meal planning that you've got something slightly ready the night before. Top end of meal planning is like 7 days of meal prep, but that's quite advanced. I don't do that myself, but I know some people do that and find it really beneficial. So it's important to find where you sit in all that. And if you are very new to meal planning, just start with a couple of days a week, get used to planning a couple of meals. Then once you're comfortable with that, just gradually increase those days. There are lots of apps that you can use on your phone to meal plan. Personally, I'm a bit of a pen and paper type of person. I have a planner that's stuck on my fridge that I love writing on. I find that more rewarding, planning my meals that way. But for some people, they love having something on their phones. So I think it's, finding something that works for you and starting off small, just start planning. And I think the other thing to mention on that, I'm sure you'll agree with me as well, Grace, is start planning those meals you struggle with. If you're absolutely fine with breakfast, but you struggle with lunch, or you struggle with your evening meal, start focusing on those first. Maybe start looking at planning a couple of lunches a week and go from there.
Absolutely, yeah. And I'm exactly the same. I'm a pen and paper person. I write it all down. Something else someone mentioned is for removing the temptation in the shops is doing online shopping. And I thought that was a really good tip that was shared in the chat. I think also sometimes just trying to avoid those aisles, or having something in mind of what you want to buy specifically. Do you have any other tips around kind of the temptations from the supermarket?
Yeah, I think sticking to that shopping list is going to be so important, isn't it? Like, plan your meals that you're going to have. And also make sure you're getting those staple ingredients. So for me, a staple ingredient is actually like an easy cook rice. So I tend to buy the rice and quinoa pouches from Aldi. They're actually really nice, the plain ones. And I do have regular rice when I've got the time to make rice from scratch, but actually sometimes it can be really helpful to have those easy cook options in the cupboard, for a rainy day or for when you just really can't be bothered. The other staple things that I've always got in my cupboard, I've always got some sort of tinned fish like tuna or tinned salmon. And then I have always got frozen vegetables in the freezer. Most of the time I've got some sort of salad items, but if I'm really running low on salad, I've always got something frozen, like some frozen spinach that I can add in with an easy cook rice, some tinned salmon, mix it all together, maybe throw in a bit of avocado for creaminess. And then you've got a bit more of a balanced meal that way. So I think it's important to make sure you've got staple things in your cupboard that last, so you can make those meals up. Eggs are a great one to have, aren't they? That eggs have got such a good shelf life on them generally. They don't last forever, obviously, but you generally can get quite a good length of time on your eggs, and they don't have to be kept in the fridge. They can be kept out. So if you're struggling with space.
Perfect. Yeah. We've got a question in the chat. Could you tell me where I could find some resources for some good festive healthy recipes?
Oh, good, healthy, festive recipes. I know the BBC Good Food have got a festive section. So BBC Good Food are really good because you can filter out kind of what cuisine you want. So, in particular, you can filter out like low fat recipes, you can filter out low carb recipes, but they have got a festive section. So I'd probably point you in that direction first. I don't know of any others. I wonder if you know, Grace.
Yeah, so BBC Good Food, and then there's a separate website called BBC Food, which is very confusing, but they're very different. And you can find different recipes in each of them. So I'd say definitely have a look at both of them. And then supermarkets have their own recipes as well. So if you know that you're definitely going to a specific supermarket, you can look at their recipes online, and then you can get all the ingredients from there as well. So with the shopping list again, or if you're doing an online shop, at least you can get it all in the same place then.
Yeah, real. Thank you. Yeah, that's a good one. I didn't know there was a difference between BBC Good Food and BBC Food. Neither
did I until recently, but yeah, they're different. There's another question in the chat. Someone saying that they can't meal plan as it depends on their pain levels as to what they're able to do. They don't really go to parties and they can't drink with the tablets that they're on. So I think they're just asking for any advice around other things maybe, or how to meal plan, but also potentially have a plan for sort of low level pain days and higher level pain days. Is that possible, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, there's three things in that question, isn't there? So we'll just kind of break them down a little bit more. It is really difficult to meal plan when you're in constant pain, and, you know, it sounds really rough. But I think what you've got to do is understand, you know, that your meal planning, plan for those really easy convenience meals that don't take a lot of standing around, you know, don't take a lot of stirring the stove, just those really, really easy meals, like I've just mentioned earlier, like an easy cooked rice, a tin of tuna, tin of salmon, and some frozen vegetables that you can steam in the microwave, you know, something really, really easy like that. Or the other type of things I like to think about is like your tray bakes. So, you know, you can get pre-chopped vegetables. So you can order them online, you pre-chop vegetables, line them in a baking tray. You can pop frozen salmon fillets on there, frozen fish fillets, whatever it might be, drizzle in a bit of olive oil, whack them in the oven, you know, and you can serve that with your easy cooked rice. So, you know, in terms of the chopping involved, I think that's what it is, isn't it? We want to find meals that we're not standing around for ages prepping, want to find really easy things that are still balanced, still healthy. And I think give yourself a little bit of kindness as well and compassion, and maybe do a bit of a broad generic plan. So you've got maybe a couple of ideas of meals for the week, but you don't necessarily have them on specific days. So it's a bit more like, these are my healthy, balanced meals, but I will change the days around depending on how I'm feeling. You know, if I'm really not feeling hungry, really not feeling up to, you know, even sticking something in the oven, what's my next best thing? And I suppose this is when you could look at things like your healthier ready meals that you can buy, you know, that are a little bit more balanced. And that's where it's important to check your labels and look for something which is a better option. We're not looking for perfect, are we? We're just looking for better options. So I think that's what I would suggest for meal planning. I'm sorry, Grace, I don't know what the rest of that question was, because there was a few other parts of that, wasn't there?
Yes. So the next part says, in terms of they don't go to parties, they can't drink because of the tablets they're on, and they're in a wheelchair, so they can't do any walking. So I guess in terms of maybe some physical activity or movement advice. Other than that, I'm not sure what other parts of the question we can answer.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. Thank you. I just forgotten that. Yeah, so I suppose when it comes to keeping active, as I mentioned, you know, a second ago, that varies for each and every one of us. That might not mean that we're going out and doing a walk. That can be exercises that we can do at home. So, you know, even if we are seated and we're doing seated exercises, it's still important to get that blood flow around our body and practice some seated exercises, you know, keep the blood flow around, moving our bones and our joints and our muscles. So focusing on some upper body movements, you know, and just those little things that we can do. And, you know, maybe it's something that you try and do a couple of times a day. So you do it in the morning, maybe after lunch, maybe before bed, more of your kind of strengthening and flexibility exercises whilst you're seated. Anything is better than nothing.
Absolutely, yeah. And just going back to the quick recipes, lots of people in the chat have spoken about slow cookers and how much they love using them as well.
Yes, I forgot about that. That's really, really good tip. You just whack everything in, don't you? And it does the job for you. Yeah, amazing. I love my slow cooker.
Yeah. Apart from that, there's no other questions. But I did also like your talk on boundaries. I think setting boundaries can be quite difficult and a lot of people do struggle. But like you said, it's about prioritizing yourself, isn't it? And making sure that your needs are being met. And just knowing that you can't control how the other person is going to react either, but you know that you're putting yourself first, and that's really important.
Yeah, absolutely. And as I mentioned, you know, something I've struggled with, I'm sure we can all relate to that. It's that whole, worrying about upsetting other people's feelings. But it's so empowering when you start to just put yourself first. And, that doesn't mean that we're being selfish. And a lot of people think that setting boundaries means that we're being really selfish. We're not. We're just, trying to live a life where as I said, our needs are being met as well. And sometimes that means just setting those boundaries with people and making sure we're sticking to them. So if we don't respect our own boundaries, we can't expect other people to. And other people are going to continuously push our boundaries if we're not, respecting what we've set out to do. It's like the example I always try and use is if you've said to your boss, I can't work on Wednesday evenings because it's my time with the kids or something like that. And then, maybe you get asked to do something on a Wednesday evening and, you're a bit unhappy about doing that. You think, oh, I've already told them that I couldn't do that. But then you do it anyway. That person learns that your boundaries can be pushed. So it's so important when it comes to boundary settings, just to really, assert them. And you will feel good as a result of that. But it takes a bit of practice, just maybe start with something really small. If it feels like a big daunting thing to set boundaries, just start with little things at a time.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think practice is key, isn't it, with anything? It takes practice. It's not going to happen instantly. Okay, so we haven't had any more questions. So I think we'll just give people maybe a minute just in case you want to pop something in at the last second. But yeah, thanks, Abby. That was great. I think we all really enjoyed that, and the chat's been really active as well. So that's really good to see.
Yeah, definitely. I can say I'm just going through actually all the messages as well, just trying to catch up. There's quite a lot of them in there. Mm-hmm. As it Pauline's, but I'm not too good at saying no. I know it feels really difficult. When you're used to saying yes. This is what we call people pleasing. So if it's what you've always done, it's going to feel alien to do anything different. So, you've got to take that little bit of a step to just push yourself a little bit out of your comfort zone and see if it'll benefit you. This is being recorded, I believe. Is that right, Grace? So yeah, you'll be able to watch this webinar back at a later date. I believe it'll be popped on YouTube.
Yes, it will, on our YouTube channel. Another question has just popped into the chat saying, what swaps are there for food and beer at parties, or what are the healthier options at a buffet? So I don't know if you want to quickly cover that, or in a few points. Again, there's a few parts to that question, isn't there?
Yeah, of course. So I suppose if you've gone to a buffet and it's not a case where you can bring your own, so to speak, you've turned up at a buffet environment, I think the first thing to do is look at the buffet, look at what you've got available, rather than kind of putting everything on your plate. Just scan the buffet table for what's actually on there. Once you've scanned the buffet table, you should have a bit of a better understanding of what you actually want on your plate. There are many times when I've been to a buffet and I've kind of put things on to start with, and then I've got a bit further along and I've been like, oh, that looks better than that, and then you end up putting more on your plate that you don't necessarily need. So scan the buffet table first. Secondly, hunt out your vegetables. Hunt out any salad you can, put them on your plate first. If you're with us on the program, you'll know what the easy plate is. It's that half plate of veg. See what you can find on the buffet table. Next, look for your good source of protein. Look for your good source of carbohydrates. So try and get that balanced plate as best as you can, and be kind to yourself. It's going to be difficult. You haven't prepared that meal, so you can only do the best you can. And then once you've got your plate, try and position yourself away from that buffet table so you're not looking back at it. You're not looking at what else can I have. You've got your back to the buffet, eat it slowly, enjoy it. And if you do need to go back for more, you can go back for more, but just take your time with it, slow down, and remember that isn't your only once and only opportunity to have those foods again. If you want those foods, you can go out and buy them. You're not missing out. I hope that helps.
Absolutely, yeah. Someone else has just said, what are the lower calorie alcohol options?
That's an interesting one. So I think with alcohol, there's no point you swapping to alcohol that you don't really like, because then you just, the way I look at it is you're putting something in your body that you don't really like just for the sake of cutting down on a few calories. My thoughts around alcohol is have what your favorite alcohol, but just try and drink less of it. So the tips that I shared earlier, have a smaller quantity of what you normally drink. or and I should say, and alternate with your water and your soft drinks. I find it helpful personally to drink either Prosecco or like champagne if I'm lucky, because it's in those little flutes and you know that you're having a smaller quantity. It's about 125 millilitres. Whereas if I'm pouring myself a glass of red wine, and I do love red wine, it's harder to stick to 125 mils because you get the big wine glasses these days. So I find it sometimes easier to stick to Prosecco because I know it's in that smaller flute. I can alternate with water, and also bubbles. I get fed up after a few glasses of bubbles, so then I'll stop. So it is personal for you, but yeah, stick to a smaller quantity. I suppose with your mixers, if you're having like a whiskey or a brandy, make sure you're drinking it with a diet mixer as well. That's something to bear in mind, so that at least you're having less energy from those additional things that maybe you aren't that bothered about.
Perfect. Thank you, Abby. That's all the questions. Someone asked for the YouTube link as well, so I've just popped that in the chat if anyone wants to save it or copy and paste it somewhere. But thank you all for coming. It's really good to see that quite a few of you have joined us tonight. But yeah, you can always catch up on it as well on the YouTube channel.
And Merry Christmas, everyone.
Yes, Merry Christmas. Take care.